The Grand Lux Hotel's ballroom shimmered under a constellation of crystal chandeliers, their prisms scattering golden light across the polished marble floor. Champagne flutes clinked delicately in the hands of the elite, their laughter weaving. Through the air, like threads of silk-draped tables gleamed with silver cutlery, each centerpiece a cascade of white roses and flickering candles. The room pulsed with wealth, power, and privilege, an untouchable world where status was currency. Into this gilded sanctuary stepped Lillian Voss, her sleek black gown hugging her frame like a shadow given form. Her entrance was silent, but seismic, slicing through the opulence like a quiet storm, her presence a ripple that turned heads before anyone fully understood why. Across the room, her family caught sight of her, their reactions as sharp and predictable as a blade drawn from its sheath. Clara Voss, her mother, stood near a towering ice sculpture, her silver hair swept into an impeccable chignon, her lips painted a severe crimson, parted as her voice cut through the hum of the crowd. Why is this failure here? The words were deliberate, venomous, designed to wound and dismiss in a single breath. She clutched her champagne flute tighter, her manicured nails glinting like tiny daggers under the chandelier light. Beside her, Serena, Lillian's younger sister, crossed her arms over her ivory gown, her lips curling into a smirk that was both smug and rehearsed. "You're not on the guest list," she announced, her voice loud enough to ripple outward, inviting the nearby guests to turn and stare. She tilted her head, her diamond earrings catching the light as if to underscore her superiority. Victor, their father, stood a step behind, his broad shoulders rigid in a tailored tuxedo. He didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge Lillian's presence. Instead, he lifted his drink, whiskey, neat, and took a slow sip, his eyes fixed on some distant point as if she were a ghost he'd long since exorcised from his reality. The room shifted subtly, a collective inhale as the tension sparked. Guests in their finery, men in crisp suits, women dripping with jewels began to murmur, their curiosity sharpening like knives against a whetstone. Serena's fiancé, Julian, stood beside her, a tall figure with dark hair and a practiced charm. That had faltered the moment Lillian appeared. His smirk, once a fixture of his easy confidence, vanished in an instant. His hand froze mid-gesture, the champagne in his glass, trembling slightly as his face drained of color. Recognition flickered in his hazel eyes, a dawning realization that tightened his jaw and made his throat bob with a thick swallow. He knew something the others didn't yet grasp, and it rooted him to the spot, his breath catching as if he'd seen a specter rise from the grave. The whispers grew, a soft chorus of speculation weaving through the crowd, their gazes darting between Lillian and the family she'd disrupted. Lillian took a slow, deliberate step forward, her heels clicking against the marble with a sound that echoed like a metronome counting down to chaos. Her dark eyes swept the room, unflinching, before settling on her family. A cool, measured smile curved her lips, sharp enough to cut through their disdain. "Do you really not know who I am?" she asked, her voice low but piercing, each word a spark igniting the unease that thickened the air. The question hung there, unanswered, a challenge wrapped in velvet, setting the stage for the storm she'd come to unleash. The night Lillian Voss was cast out, the cold was a living thing, sinking its teeth into her bones. She was 18, standing on the frost-crusted steps of the Voss family estate, a sprawling mansion glowing with amber light behind its arched windows. The air bit at her fingertips, turning them numb as she clutched her thin jacket closer. Clara's voice still echoed in her ears, sharp and final. "You're a burden." Her mother had stood in the foyer, wrapped in a cashmere shawl. Her face, a mask of indifference as she delivered the verdict. No warmth, no hesitation, just a dismissal, as cold as the wind howling through the bare trees. Victor, towering in the doorway, hadn't even met her eyes. His hands, rough from years of commanding respect, gripped the heavy oak door. "We've done enough," he'd said, his voice a low growl, before slamming it shut with a thud that reverberated through her chest. Through the frosted glass, she glimpsed Serena, 16 and radiant, smirking from the warm glow of the house. Her sister's lips curled in silent triumph, as if Lillian's expulsion was a victory she'd orchestrated herself. Left with nothing but $20 crumpled in her pocket, Lillian wandered into the night, the city street stretching out like a frozen labyrinth. For 3 nights, she huddled near a diner's dumpster, the stench of grease and rotting food mingling with the faint heat, seeping from the kitchen vents. She curled into herself, her breath fogging in the air, her stomach gnawing with hunger. On the 3rd morning, a shadow fell over her. Nora, the diner's owner, a wiry woman with gray-streaked hair and eyes like steel. She tossed a broom at Lillian's feet, its handle clattering against the pavement. "Earn your keep, Nora," snapped, her voice gruff but not unkind. That broom was her lifeline, the first thread of a new beginning. Years later, standing in the grand luxe ballroom, Lillian let the memory flicker briefly through her mind. The cold, the rejection, the dumpster. They hadn't broken her. She straightened her spine, her gaze hardening. I didn't just survive, she thought. I prepared for this day. The flashback faded, her strength now a quiet fire, ready to burn. The grand luxe ballroom thrummed with a low buzz of anticipation, the air thick with the scent of champagne, an expensive perfume. Lillian Voss stood at the center of it all, her black gown a stark contrast to the glittering crowd. Across from her, Serena leaned against a silk-draped table, her ivory dress shimmering under the chandeliers. Her smirk was a weapon honed from years of wielding superiority. "Here to beg for forgiveness," she taunted, her voice carrying just enough to draw the eyes of nearby guests. Pathetic. The word dripped with disdain, a deliberate echo of the past, meant to sting. She tossed her head, her diamond necklace glinting like a crown she assumed she'd always wear. But Lillian didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes glinting with something unreadable. "If I'm pathetic," she said, her voice smooth as velvet, "why do you look so nervous?" The question landed like a pebble in still water, sending ripples through Serena's. Composure. Her smirk faltered for a heartbeat, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face before she masked it. Lillian reached into her clutch with deliberate grace, pulling out a neatly folded sheet of paper. She held it between her fingers, letting the moment stretch, the rustle of paper cutting through, the murmurs. Then with a flick of her wrist, she unfolded it. Serena's academic record, stark black ink on white, proving she'd never graduated medical school. "This might explain it," Lillian said, her tone almost conversational. Julian, standing rigid beside Serena, snatched the document from her hand, his movements sharp with urgency. His hazel eyes scanned the page, and his voice dropped low, a tremor beneath its calm. "Serena, what's this?" The question wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that silenced the chatter around them. His fingers tightened on the paper, creasing it as he read the damning evidence. Dates of withdrawal, failing grades, no degree conferred. Serena's response was immediate, a counterattack as instinctive as breathing. She threw her head back and laughed, a loud performative sound that echoed off the marble walls. "It's fake! Don't be stupid!" she exclaimed, waving a dismissive hand as if she could swat the truth away. Her voice was bright, almost convincing, but her eyes betrayed her, wide, darting, glinting with panic she couldn't fully hide. The guests leaned in, their whispers growing into a soft roar, forks pausing midair, champagne flutes tilting forgotten in their hands. They smelled blood in the water, and Lillian's calm stood in stark contrast to Serena's unraveling bravado. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. Her stillness was a blade, cutting deeper than any shout. Julian's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching as he stared at the paper. He didn't speak again. Didn't need to. His knuckles whitened around the edges of the document, and his breathing grew shallow. He knew it was real, had to know, from the way his shoulders stiffened and his gaze flicked to Serena, searching for a lie that wouldn't come. The crack in her perfect facade widened, a fissure splitting the golden child's throne. The room held its breath, sensing more to come, and Lillian's steady gaze promised it. The atmosphere in the ballroom crackled, with the weight of Lillian Voss's revelations teetering on the edge of chaos as the murmurs of the crowd swelled into a restless hum. Serena's forced laughter still lingered, brittle and hollow, but Lillian wasn't finished. With a slow, deliberate motion, she reached into her clutch once more, her fingers closing around a sleek black USB drive. She held it up, letting it catch the chandelier light, a small object that gleamed with menace. "This," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Emails, legal documents, proof the Voss family clinic's been running insurance fraud for years." The words landed like a thunderclap. Clara gasped, a sharp, involuntary sound that broke her icy composure, her champagne flute trembling. In her hand, Victor snapped forward, his face twisting with fury. "You're lying!" he roared, his voice a desperate bellow that echoed off the marble walls, but the quiver in his tone betrayed him. Lillian's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, unruffled by his outburst. Julian, already shaken by the academic record, stepped forward, his movements jerky with barely contained rage. He snatched the USB from Lillian's hand, his knuckles whitening as he gripped it. Without a word, he strode to the DJ booth, shoving aside a stack of speakers to reach the laptop. The DJ, a wiry man in a cheap tuxedo, stumbled back, wide-eyed, as Julian jammed the drive into the port. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh blue glow across his face. Lines of text scrolled, falsified patient records, invoices for treatments, never provided bank transfers, siphoning millions into offshore accounts. The evidence was undeniable, a digital noose tightening around the Voss family. Julian's breath hitched, his eyes darting across the damning files. He spun to face Serena, his voice raw with betrayal. "You lied to me!" The accusation exploded from him, loud enough to silence the room. His hand flew to his left finger, yanking off the gold wedding band. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled it at Serena's feet, the metallic clink reverberating like a gunshot. The ring skittered across the marble, coming to rest near her trembling heels, a symbol of their shattered future. Lillian watched the scene unfold, her calm a stark counterpoint to the unraveling chaos. She took a step closer, her heels clicking with precision, and delivered the final strike. "Oh, and one more thing," she said, her smile widening just enough to show teeth. "You've been using my identity for tax fraud for a decade. The IRS is outside." The words were a guillotine, swift and final. Victor staggered, his broad frame swaying as if the floor had shifted beneath him. His hand clutched at his chest, his face draining of color, a man staring into the abyss of his own ruin. Clara froze, her champagne flute slipping from her fingers to shatter on the marble in a spray of glass and golden liquid. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her calculated facade cracked beyond repair. Serena, already crumbling, let out a sob, a raw, guttural sound that tore through the silence. She sank to her knees, her ivory gown pooling around her like a fallen banner, her hands clawing at the floor as if she could grasp her collapsing world. The external fallout erupted like wildfire. Harris, the hospital director, a wiry man with silver hair and a perpetual scowl, had been watching from the back of the room. His face flushed crimson as the implications sank in, the clinic's fraud, tied directly to his institution's reputation. He barked at his assistant, a young woman in a navy blazer who fumbled with her phone. "Call legal now." His voice was a whip crack, sharp and urgent, cutting through the rising din. The assistant nodded frantically, her fingers trembling as she dialed. Security moved in, two burly men in black suits weaving through the crowd with grim purpose. They reached Victor first, each grabbing an arm as he thrashed against their grip. "This is outrageous!" he shouted, his voice hoarse, but they dragged him toward the exit, his polished shoes scuffing the floor. Clara followed, her protests shrill and disjointed. "You can't do this. We're the bosses." But the guards were unmoved, hauling her out as her silver hair unraveled from its chignon. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that rippled through the ballroom. Guests stepped back, clutching their drinks, their faces a mix of shock and morbid fascination. Whispers turned to exclamations, scandal spreading like ink through water. Lillian stood at the epicenter, her gaze sweeping over the wreckage she'd wrought. The chandelier light glinted off her gown, casting her as both architect and executioner of this collapse. Serena's sobs grew louder, a pitiful counterpoint to the chaos, while Victor's shouts faded into the hallway. Clara's broken glass lay at her feet, a glittering testament to their downfall. The room was a tableau of ruin, wealth, tarnished, power-stripped, lies exposed, and Lillian had orchestrated it all with the precision of a maestro. The stage was set, the traps sprung, and the Voss family's empire lay in ashes. Chaos reigned in the wake of Lillian's triumph, a maelstrom of shattered illusions swirling through the once pristine air, now thick with the stench of scandal. Crystal. Shards from Clara's dropped flute glittered on the marble floor, catching the chandelier light like fallen stars. Victor's muffled shouts echoed from the hallway where security had dragged him, while the guests buzzed with fevered whispers, their elegant masks slipping to reveal raw astonishment. At the center of this wreckage knelt Serena, her ivory gown splayed around her like a wilted flower, mascara streaking black rivers down her cheeks. Her hands trembled as she reached out, grasping at the air between them. "Lillian, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking, a desperate sob bubbling beneath the words. "Stop this." Her eyes, wide and glistening, begged for mercy, a stark reversal of the smirk she'd worn years ago. It was the sound of a golden child dethroned, her perfect world reduced to ash at her feet. Lillian stood over her, a silhouette of unyielding resolve against the chaos. Her dark eyes glinted with a cold fire, unsoftened by Serena's tears. She tilted her head, considering the plea for a fleeting moment, then spoke, her voice ice-sharp and unforgiving. "I don't recall you pleading when you left me in the cold." Each word was a deliberate cut, a memory of that freezing night when Serena had smirked from the warm house as the door slammed shut. Lillian's gaze dropped to the discarded wedding ring, its gold dulled against the marble, a symbol of Serena's broken empire. With a slow, measured step, she moved forward, her heel clicking as she stepped over the ring, the sound a quiet punctuation to their severed bond. She turned away, her back straight, her black gown trailing behind her like a shadow, reclaiming its power. Serena's sobs grew fainter, swallowed by the clamor as Lillian left her to drown in the ruin she'd sown. At the ballroom's grand double doors, Ethan waited, his lean frame a steady anchor amid the storm. His dark hair was slightly tousled, his suit jacket unbuttoned, but his presence radiated calm. He quirked a brow, a faint smirk tugging at his lips as he met her gaze. "Cake?" he asked, his voice low and playful, cutting through the weight of the moment with effortless ease. Lillian paused, then laughed, a deep, free sound that spilled from her chest, unshackled and unrestrained. It echoed through the foyer, a melody of triumph that drowned out the chaos behind her. "Yes," she said, still. grinning, her eyes bright with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. "Let's go." Ethan offered his arm, and she took it, their fingers brushing in a silent pact. They stepped through the doors together, leaving the wreckage of the Voss family to crumble in their wake. Outside, the night air was crisp, a sharp bite that cleansed the lingering heat of the ballroom. The city hummed in the distance, its lights flickering like a living thing, oblivious to the destruction Lillian had left behind. She took a deep breath, the coolness filling her lungs, and mused silently. Revenge wasn't the goal. Freedom was, and "Now it's mine." The thought settled over her like a mantle, final and absolute. She was no longer the girl cast out. She was free.